welcome to DCF Investigations. To understand the terror that gripped the Crescent City more than a century ago, you must first close your eyes and transport yourself back to the humid, gas-lit streets of New Orleans in 1918. This was a city on the edge, vibrating with a chaotic energy that was both intoxicating and dangerous. The Great War was raging across the Atlantic, drawing young men away to the trenches of France, leaving a void of protection in the households they left behind. Simultaneously, an invisible killer known as the Spanish flu was beginning to seep into the ports, bringing with it a silent dread that made neighbors suspicious of neighbors. But in the shadowed corners of the Italian immigrant communities, deep within the sleepless neighborhoods where grocery stores doubled as family homes, a different kind of darkness was sharpening its blade. This was not a darkness born of geopolitical conflict or biological contagion. It was a human darkness, a phantom that would enter through the back door, chisel through the wood, and exact a brutal, bloody toll before vanishing into the fog of the Mississippi River. We are here to investigate the legend, the hysteria, and the cold, hard facts of the Axeman of New Orleans. The story of the Axeman is often told as a ghost story, a piece of folklore whispered to frighten tourists in the French Quarter. But the victims were real. The blood that stained the floorboards of those grocery stores was real. And the panic that caused an entire city to stay up all night, blasting jazz music from every open window to appease a madman, was a very real psychological phenomenon. Our investigation begins not with the most famous letter, but with the first drop of blood in what would become a torrent. It was May 22nd, 1918. The humidity was already rising, sticking to the skin of the residents of the city. Joseph Maggio and his wife, Catherine, were sleeping in their home on the corner of Upper Line and Magnolia Streets. They were Italian immigrants, running a modest grocery store, a common trade for the Italian-American community in New Orleans at the time. These corner stores were the lifeblood of the neighborhoods, but they also made the owners vulnerable. They lived where they worked, often with cash on the premises, and their homes were accessible to the public during the day. In the dead of night, while the Maggios slept, a presence entered their home. The intruder did not smash a window or kick down a door. Instead, he worked with a terrifying, silent precision. He chiseled out a panel in the lower section of the back door, a method that would become the terrifying signature of the Axeman. Once the panel was removed, he could reach in, turn the lock, and slip inside like a vapor. What happened next was a frenzy of violence that shocked even the hardened detectives of the New Orleans Police Department. Joseph Maggio was struck repeatedly with an axe. The blows were so severe that his skull was fractured in multiple places. His wife, Catherine, met an even grimmer fate. Her throat was cut so deep that her head was nearly severed from her body. But the killer was not finished with the axe. He used it on her as well, bludgeoning her lifeless form. When the brothers of Joseph Maggio, who lived in the other half of the double house, rushed in after hearing groans, they found a scene from a nightmare. Joseph was still alive, barely. He died minutes later in his brother's arms. But as the police arrived and the investigation began, the strangeness of the crime started to materialize. The bloody straight razor used to cut Catherine's throat was found on the bed. It belonged to Joseph Maggio. The axe, covered in blood and hair, was found in the bathroom. It too belonged to the Maggios. This killer did not bring his own weapons. He used the tools of domesticity, the very objects the victims used for their daily lives, and turned them into instruments of slaughter. Nothing of value was stolen. Money was left in plain sight. Jewelry was untouched. This was not a robbery. This was hatred. This was a ritual. Police immediately looked for a motive. They found a message written in chalk on the pavement a block away. It read simply, "Mrs. Maggio will sit up tonight, just like Mrs. Tony." The police were baffled. Who was Mrs. Tony? Was this a warning? Or was it a taunt left by the killer to confuse the authorities? The investigation initially focused on the Maggio brothers, a common tactic when family members are the first on the scene, but they were eventually cleared. The case went cold, leaving the Italian community whispering about the Black Hand, the extortionist mafia gangs that plagued the immigrant populations. But the Black Hand usually wanted money. This killer wanted only death. For a month, the city held its breath. Then, the silence was broken. On June 27, 1918, a baker named John Zanca went to make a delivery to the grocery store of Louis Bessumer. The shop was closed, which was unusual. Zanca went to the side entrance and found it open. Inside, he discovered Louis Bessumer and his mistress, Harriet Lowe, soaked in blood. Bessumer, a Polish-born grocer, had been struck in the head with a hatchet. Harriet Lowe had been hacked above her left ear. Both were alive, but barely. Once again, the signature was present. A lower panel on the back door had been chiseled out. The axe, belonging to Bessumer, was found in the bathroom. This attack, however, brought a new layer of complexity to the case. The unreliable narrator. Harriet Lowe, in her delirium and pain, made erratic statements. The media frenzy was immediate, because Bessumer was suspected of being a German spy due to the ongoing World War, and because he had a mistress, the public sentiment turned against him. In a twist that highlights the chaotic nature of justice at the time, police suspected Bessumer of attacking Lowe, or perhaps a lover's quarrel gone wrong. Harriet Lowe underwent multiple surgeries. She would drift in and out of consciousness, telling police contradictory stories. At one point, she claimed a tall, dark man had attacked them. Later, under the pressure of police questioning, and perhaps the influence of painkillers, she implicated Bessumer himself. Louis Bessumer was arrested for the attack on his own mistress. It was a circus. The true pattern was being ignored in favor of a scandalous domestic drama. Harriet Lowe eventually died from her injuries months later, but not before her confused testimony muddied the waters, allowing the real predator to slip further into the shadows. As the summer turned to autumn, the terror intensified. On August 5th, Mrs. Edward Schneider was alone in her home. She was 8 months pregnant. She saw a dark figure looming over her bed. She screamed. The figure struck her in the face with a lamp, then slashed her with an axe. Miraculously, she survived, and days later, she gave birth to a healthy baby girl. The survival of Mrs. Schneider was a beacon of hope, but it also proved that the killer was escalating. He was attacking women, pregnant women, with zero regard for life. Then came the darkness of Joseph Romano. On August 10th, the nieces of Joseph Romano, an elderly Italian man living with them, heard a commotion in his room. They rushed in to see a large, heavy-set man fleeing the scene. Their uncle had been struck in the head. He had been able to walk to the ambulance, but the damage was too severe. He died 2 days later. The description given by the nieces was the first real glimpse of the monster. A dark-complexioned, heavy-set man, wearing a dark suit and a slouch hat. By this point, the city of New Orleans was in a state of absolute hysteria. The police superintendent, Frank Mooney, finally admitted that they were dealing with a serial offender. The press dubbed him the Axeman. Families began organizing neighborhood watches. Men sat on their front porches with shotguns on their laps. The chiseling of the back door panel became the stuff of urban legend. People began reinforcing their doors, nailing heavy furniture against the back entrances. But then, as suddenly as the violence had begun, it stopped. The autumn of 1918 passed. Winter came, the war ended. The Spanish flu raged and then waned. For months, there were no axe attacks. Had the killer died? Had he been drafted? Or had he simply moved on? The respite lasted until March 10th, 1919. The Axeman returned, and he returned with a vengeance that shattered the peace of the Cortimiglia family. Charles Cortimiglia was an immigrant grocer living in Gretna, just across the river from New Orleans. He lived with his wife Rosie and their 2-year-old daughter Mary. The attack on the Cortimiglia family is perhaps the most heartbreaking chapter of this entire saga. Neighbors heard screams and rushed to the house. They found Rosie standing in the doorway, bleeding heavily from a head wound, clutching her deceased daughter in her arms. Mary had been killed instantly by a blow to the back of the neck. Charles Cortimiglia lay on the floor, bleeding from severe head wounds. The scene was one of utter devastation. The panel in the back door had been chiseled away. The bloody axe was found on the back porch. But the tragedy of the Cortimiglia attack did not end with the violence. It continued into the courtroom. In the aftermath of the trauma, while recovering in the hospital, Rosie Cortimiglia accused her neighbors, Orlando Giordano and his son Frank, of the crime. The Giordanos were business rivals, and there was bad blood between the families. However, the Giordanos were significantly older, and the son was too large to fit through the chiseled panel. Despite the lack of physical evidence, and despite the fact that the modus operandi perfectly matched the Axeman, the grief-stricken community and the police were desperate for a conviction. They wanted a face to put to the terror. The Giordanos were arrested. In a trial fueled by hysteria and Rosie's testimony, they were found guilty. Frank was sentenced to hang. His father, Orlando, was given life in prison. It was a miscarriage of justice born of fear. Years later, Rosie would recant her testimony, admitting she had falsely accused them out of confusion and spite, and the Giordanos would be released. But for a time, the city believed they had caught the killers, even though deep down, many knew the Axeman was still out there. It was during this period of high tension that the legend of the Axeman transcended mere crime and entered the realm of cultural mythology. On March 13th, 1919, a letter arrived at the office of the Times-Picayune newspaper. It was purportedly written by the killer himself. The language was melodramatic, threatening, and bizarre. It read like the monologue of a villain in a Gothic novel. The letter began with the chilling words, "Hell, March 13th, 1919. Esteemed mortal of New Orleans. They have never caught me, and they never will. They have never seen me, for I am invisible, even as the ether that surrounds your earth. I am not a human being, but a spirit and a demon from the hottest hell. I am what you Orleanians and your foolish police call the Axeman. The writer went on to mock the police, calling them utterly stupid. But then he issued an ultimatum that would define the legacy of this case forever. He wrote, "Now, to be exact, at 12:15 on next Tuesday night, I am going to pass over New Orleans. In my infinite mercy, I am going to make a little proposition to you people. Here it is. I am very fond of jazz music, and I swear by all the devils in the nether regions that every person shall be spared in whose home a jazz band is in full swing at the time I have just mentioned. If everyone has a jazz band going, well, then, so much the better for you people. One thing is certain, and that is that some of your people who do not jazz it on Tuesday night will get the axe. The city of New Orleans, a city that practically invented jazz, took this threat with deadly seriousness. On the night of March 19th, 1919, the city came alive in a way it never had before. It was a macabre party, a dance for survival. Every dance hall was packed to capacity. Amateur bands played in living rooms. Phonographs were placed in open windows, blasting the syncopated rhythms of ragtime and jazz into the humid night air. The wealthy hired private bands to play in their parlors. The poor gathered in groups, clapping and singing. It was a night of surreal unity, driven by the fear of a supernatural executioner. The sound of jazz blanketed the entire city, a sonic shield against the darkness. And, true to his word, the Axeman did not strike that night. The sun rose on a city that was exhausted, hungover, but alive. The letter had been honored. Whether it was truly written by the killer or by a prankster seizing the moment, we will never know for sure. But it solidified the connection between the Axeman and the musical soul of New Orleans. However, the Axeman was not finished. The jazz night was a temporary reprieve. In August 1919, a grocer named Steve Boca was attacked in his bedroom. He survived, and once again, the chiseled panel was found. Then, in September, a young girl named Sarah Lauman was attacked. She survived. Finally, in October 1919, the killer struck for the last recorded time. Mike Pepitone was killed in his home. His wife saw the killer fleeing, a large man, echoing the description from the Romano murder. And then, silence. After the murder of Mike Pepitone, the Axeman of New Orleans simply vanished. The attack stopped completely. There were no more chiseled panels, no more bloody axes left in bathtubs. The reign of terror ended as mysteriously as it had begun. So, who was he? For over a century, amateur sleuths and professional criminologists have pored over the files. Let us examine the leading theories and the suspects that have emerged from the fog of history. The most prominent theory focuses on a man named Joseph Mumfre. This theory suggests that the Axeman was not a chaotic serial killer, but a hitman for the Black Hand Mafia, targeting Italian grocers who refused to pay extortion money. The timeline of the attacks curiously aligns with the prison records of Joseph Mumfre. He was released from prison shortly before the attacks began in 1911. Yes, there were similar attacks in 1911 that many attribute to the same killer, and he was re-imprisoned during the lull in the attacks. He was released again just before the 1918 wave began. The legend goes that Mumfre left New Orleans for Los Angeles after the Pepitone murder. There, he was allegedly tracked down by the widow of Mike Pepitone, who had moved to California. The story claims she shot him dead. exacting the justice the law could not. While this narrative is satisfying and fits the Hollywood mold of revenge, verified historical records on Mumfre are scarce and contradictory. There is no definitive proof linking him to the crimes, but the circumstantial evidence regarding the targeting of Italian grocers is compelling. Another theory posits that the killer was a sexual sadist. The attacks often occurred in bedrooms. While sexual assault was not the primary component of the crime scenes, the intimacy of attacking people in their sleep, the targeting of women, and the frenzied nature of the violence suggest a psychosexual motive. The jazz letter also hints at a personality that craved attention and control, a classic trait of many serial killers who taunt the police and media. We must also consider the racial dynamics of the time. The majority of the victims were Italian immigrants. In 1918, Italians in the American South were often treated as second-class citizens, subjected to intense prejudice. Was the killer a nativist? Someone who hated immigrants and sought to terrorize their community? The specificity of the victims, almost all Italian grocers, cannot be ignored. It suggests a killer who either belonged to that community and had a vendetta, or someone from outside who was targeting them specifically. We also cannot overlook the copycat theory. It is possible that the first murder, that of Joseph Maggio, was a unique event, perhaps a mafia hit. The subsequent attacks might have been committed by different individuals using the details published in the newspapers to cover their tracks. The chiseled panel became public knowledge very quickly. Anyone wanting to kill a rival or spouse could have chiseled a panel and blamed it on the Axeman. This would explain the inconsistencies in the descriptions of the attacker and the varying survival rates of the victims. Let us dig deeper into the forensic limitations of the era. In 1918, there was no DNA testing. Fingerprinting was in its infancy and often unreliable. Crime scene preservation was virtually non-existent. Dozens of people, neighbors, family members, reporters, would trample through the crime scenes before the police could secure them. The axe, the primary weapon, was usually the victim's own property, meaning it was covered in their fingerprints, not the killer's. The killer left no trace that the science of the time could detect. He was, effectively, a ghost. There is also the chilling connection to an earlier series of crimes. In 1911 and 1912, a series of similar attacks occurred in Louisiana, attributed to the Cleaver killer. The modus operandi was nearly identical. Chiseled door panels, grocery store owners targeted, axes and cleavers used as weapons. If this was the same man, his career spanned nearly a decade. This suggests a predator of immense patience and discipline, capable of going dormant for years at a time. The psychological profile of the Axeman is that of a disorganized yet cunning offender. He was opportunistic, using weapons found on site, yet he planned his entry method meticulously. The chiseling of a door panel takes time and makes noise. To do this while people are sleeping just yards away requires a nerve of steel and a terrifying confidence. He was likely a local, someone who knew the layout of these double-house grocery stores, someone who could blend into the neighborhood. He may have been a customer during the day, scouting the location, checking the locks, only to return at night as the executioner. The letter he sent, with its references to the ether and the nether regions, suggests a man who saw himself as above humanity. He viewed his victims not as people, but as subjects in a game. The demand for jazz music was an exercise in power. He wanted to prove that he could control the behavior of an entire city. He wanted to see the lights on, hear the music playing, and know that he was the conductor of that fear. It was an act of supreme narcissism. Today, the grocery stores that were the sites of these tragedies are mostly gone or converted. The streets of New Orleans have changed, but the legend remains. The Axeman serves as a grim reminder of a time when the night was truly dark, when protection was a fragile concept, and when a single letter could make a city dance for its life. The case remains officially unsolved. The files are gathering dust in the archives of the New Orleans Police Department. The identity of the man who walked through the walls and wielded the axe is lost to time. Was it Joseph Mumfre? Was it a deranged jazz lover? Was it a spirit, as he claimed? Or was it simply the manifestation of the violence that always simmers beneath the surface of a crowded, desperate city? We are left with the image of that night in March 1919. A city terrified, yet vibrant. The sound of trumpets and pianos clashing with the sound of the wind. A killer walking the streets, perhaps nodding his head to the rhythm, satisfied that his orchestra was playing his tune. As you lay in bed tonight and you hear the creak of your house settling or the wind rattling your window, remember the Axeman. Remember that for some, the monster under the bed was not a childhood fantasy, but a man with a chisel and a hatchet, waiting for the music to stop. This has been a deep dive into one of America's most haunting cold cases. We have walked the bloodied floorboards of the Maggio residence and listened to the desperate jazz of a city under siege. I want to turn this over to you, the DCF Investigations community. Considering the specific targeting of Italian grocers and the timing of the prison releases, do you believe the Axeman was a lone serial killer driven by madness? Or was this the work of an organized hitman like Joseph Mumfre using the serial killer persona as a cover for mafia enforcement? Let me know your theories in the comments below. Stay vigilant, keep your doors locked, and perhaps, just to be safe, keep a little jazz playing in the background. Until next time.